Starting off this Tuesday with Aviv Redigur from Israel. Good morning, Aviv, or afternoon where you are. Thank you for joining me. Congratulations, by the way, on the new podcast, which gave me the prompt to call you back. Ask Aviv anything. I think it's fascinating. Is it taking off?
Yeah, it's doing pretty well. We have subscribers in the 5 digits and downloads in the 6 digits, and I'm on episode 7. So what more could you hope for?
Well, I want to talk to you about episode 6, but first I want to ask you about some breaking news. This morning, Gadi Taub released an interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, I'm reading it in subtitles because they're talking in Hebrew, and I've noticed a few things. I'm only going to ask you about one, which is that the Prime Minister says America stood with us initially. Then he talks about Biden's threat to cut off more than the 2,000 bombs, but plenty of things. And about what makes news the most in this interview, or anything at all?
I think that I did not see the interview go travel very much in Israeli media, including, by the way, in pro-Netanyahu media. In other words, Channel 14 is a very pro-Netanyahu channel in Israel. And I didn't see it make dramatic headlines. Netanyahu made arguments that he's made before. His fundamental argument, he made it at the Knesset, and that video was broadcast in many places, and he made it in various interviews, is that he won the war. The war seems to be going very favorably for Israel, and Iran seems to be on its back feet. Gaza is not a victory. Hamas still exists in Gaza, but Gaza really can't rebuild with Hamas in charge, and that, in a sense, and the kind of war Hamas built Gaza really to be for 17 years, the kind of war Hamas planned, in which civilian deaths is Hamas's strategy for survival, that is basically an Israeli victory. And Netanyahu is trying to ride this Israeli perception that things have shifted in the last 5 months in the Middle East, and Israel really has the upper hand going forward, and to say, I did this, and if the opposition was in charge, then, a lot of Israelis are very angry with him. Right-wing Israelis, he was the prime minister on October 7. He was the man whose strategy led us to containment of deterrence, led us to October 7, and now he's saying, I'm also the guy who turned us around. And so that was what that interview, I think, was for. It was to the base, and it's a legitimate interview. It's an interesting interview. I'll just say one little piece of criticism that I think is really fundamental. He gives very few interviews with the press, and he gives no interviews at all with the press that doesn't favor him. I mean, he's gone months at a time with not a single media interview in the middle of a war. And so it was part of Netanyahu's ongoing campaign to survive October 7, essentially, politically.
Were you surprised at all? Because this is what surprised me as an American watching the war, that the United States pressure grew so dramatically right down to that meeting that the prime minister recounts in the prime minister's office when Biden tells him to stop and not to go into Rafah. I mean, is any of that news to you? Because if it is, it's news to me, and I don't know that the American media covered it.
I didn't know about a specific moment when Biden made that specific statement, but the Biden administration for 4 months, roughly between February and May of last year, said that openly. In other words, it said, you will not go into Rafah. Remember Kamala Harris as vice president saying, I've seen the maps. It's not doable, right? I don't know what maps she saw. The Biden administration said things about not going into Rafah that were patently ridiculous. There were, it would take 4 months, they said, to move the civilians out in order to fight Hamas. Well, it ended up taking 12 days. I'm not sure the Biden administration really had a good sense. Literally, the National Security Council under Biden had a good sense of the size of Gaza. I always imagined that with the kinds of statements they made about Rafah, about Gaza, it always seemed as though on one wall in the National Security Council briefing room, they have a map of Ukraine, and on another, they have a map of Gaza, and the maps are the same size. So they kind of assumed Gaza is this enormous place. Gaza is a 25-kilometer territory, and maneuverability in Gaza is very easy. Anyway, I think Israel did fairly well in this war, better than could be expected. Not every airstrike was okay. Not every Israeli operation was successful. Civilians died. That was Hamas's fundamental strategy. Does that mean I think Israel's 100% okay? Absolutely not. But the Biden administration had an incoherent policy, not because it really believed Israel was behaving insanely in Gaza militarily, but because it was constantly with one eye on domestic politics. And it meant that President Biden told Israel not to win, which was a silly thing to say that dragged out everybody's suffering, including Gazan civilians.
In this brand new book, Fight, next time I'm talking to the authors, Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes, it reveals that President Biden lacked a lot of cognitive ability, at least in the last year of his presidency, probably in the last 2.5 years of his presidency. Have you heard anyone in Israel discuss that?
I think I'll put it really simple. I mean, you don't talk to the president much in foreign policy. It's much more likely that senators dealing or members of Congress dealing with the federal budget would speak to the president than it is that Israeli defense ministers would interact directly, consistently with the president. So I have not heard that from Israeli officials.
It's pretty shocking.
There's no reason you would think that.
Yeah, I get it.
It's
There's
not
no
that I
reason.
don't believe it.
Yeah. When you read it, when you get a chance, you'll be appalled. I was appalled. Let me move on to the Ask Aviv Anything, episode 6, because I use it to teach my class this week. I teach constitutional law, and I began by asking them, what is the rule of law? It was very confounding. Normally we do cases, holdings, 5-4 split, 6-3 split. What's the dissent say? That's basic con law. But I started with this rather general question, what is the rule of law? And it was provoked by your discussion of the Israeli judicial reform. And that's because I did not realize until Saturday that under the current system, which will remain in effect until this law takes effect, which only will happen if a new Knesset after the next election upholds it, that you need 5 out of 9 members of the Judicial Selection Committee to vote for you, and that 3 members of the Judicial Selection Committee are judges. So they have a veto. I never realized that.
7
They have a veto. That's incredible to me. And I asked the students, and I compared it to the Mexican Supreme Court, which has 11 members. Our Supreme Court has 9 members. Your Supreme Court has 15 members. It doesn't matter how many members you have. What matters is, what is the rule of law? So let me begin with the question. What do you think the rule of law means, Habib?
I think it's a set of agreed upon rules. And if you have it, your country can function without political violence. And if you don't have it, countries fairly quickly won't function without political violence. And so it's everything. Democracy depends on it. If you don't have that set of agreed upon rules that are incidentally enforceable for people stepping out, but if everybody violates them, then you can't enforce them anyway. So you both have to have social agreement, and then you have to be able to enforce it on the margins that don't agree with the set of rules. And that's the fundamental thing. I do think Israel has it. We just have this insanely powerful court.
If the court strikes down this new law, if they actually strike it down before it has a chance, before there's another election, will Israel have the rule of law, or will it really have the rule of 15?
It's a good question. It's a fascinating question. It's also a theoretical question, because there is a point where the Supreme Court becomes a parody of itself. And it knows that that's a dangerous place for it to go. You had, at the beginning of this government in January of 2023, 70% support for judicial reform. Most of the public supports judicial reform. My point was to argue in that podcast episode and lay out that argument very carefully, was that collapsed to 25% support. But it's not because people don't support judicial reform. It's because the government really badly mishandled it. It was a very politicized and very incompetent, I think. And I think they know that. In other words, there's been a massive
I think you made that.
from the vast majority of it.
You made that point very well. I'm worried that if they strike this down.
But in other words, the public won't allow it.
Right.
The public won't allow it.
What are the, let me take a quick break here. I'll come right back. Haviv Redigur is my guest. And I'm going to bring Haviv back in the third hour. I want to tell you a little bit, what is the market doing today? Because the tariff conversation is ongoing. Markets have been very sparky. And so I want to check, brought to you by AmericanFederal.com, our sponsor, Nick Grovich and his team, 1-800-221-7694, 1-800-221-7694. Dow's up at this hour, about 0.5%. The S&P's up about 0.5%. The NASDAQ, they're both down. The S&P is down by 0.21%. The Dow is down by 0.46%. The NASDAQ is up by 0.15%, and gold is down by 0.1%, $3,147 an ounce. That's not the price if you call Nick and the team at AmericanFederal.com. And again, the number is 1-800-221-7694. They add a commission whether they're buying your gold or they're selling you gold. Either way, they make a commission, but it's transparent, it's upfront, they're honest, they've been doing it for 40 years. Everybody's a gold bug, according to the Wall Street Journal yesterday. The phones are ringing off the hook at American Federal, but the service remains 5-star, as does the honesty and the transparency. Go to AmericanFederal.com. Market's just kind of treading water. They're going to wait and see what Donald Trump does, but gold has gone up for the first couple of months. I'm back with Aviv Redigor. We were talking about the Supreme Court in Israel has a law before it, a new judicial reform law. I don't know when the hearings are going to happen, but if they strike that down, Aviv, I really am going to wonder whether or not Israel has a rule of law. And would you share my worry if that happened?
I'll tell you why not. Because theoretically I should, right? It's a far too powerful court. And incidentally, the court has struck down other laws and even struck down government decisions on the theory that they violate basic laws, which are not quite constitutional. They're not hard to change. You change them just like you change any other law, but they are called basic laws and they sort of lay out the fundamental rules of the system. So they're kind of a pseudo-constitution, a very weak constitution. On the theory that a particular law violates a basic law, contradicts a basic law, the court has struck down other laws. Well, the court has, in the last year, actually struck down a basic law amendment. And now the question is, on what grounds? What's the constitutional grounds, reasonability, all these kinds of things that are essentially the judges saying, we know you don't know. The court has argued about itself that it is, I'm going to paraphrase unfairly to the judges, but why not, sort of the child with the finger in the dike holding back the flood. In other words, you can't trust the politicians. You have to keep the system democratic. We're the only people keeping the system from being overtaken by this majority tyranny that the Knesset wants to impose, that the coalition government wants to impose. That is not as silly as it sounds, because we don't have a House and a Senate with vetoes and a president with a veto and a whole vast complicated system of electing in different ways, in different fashions, on different timelines like you have. We have almost no checks in our system at all other than the court. And so the court isn't being stupid, but it also doesn't have the grounds to be the only solution. I think that if the court does that, that'll be a good thing. If the court massively oversteps its bounds and just claims a power it has no grounds to claim, and then essentially forces an election to be on the court's power, if that happens, then that's a good thing, because Israelis will finally seriously pay attention to this question and deal with it. And if the court doesn't do that, which is what I suspect, because it would be really a breaking of the system, then I think the politicians will have to be responsible in creating a much more serious, carefully worded, serious constitutional law, talking about the court's powers, talking about other checks and balances in the system in ways the Israelis don't have. I'm sorry for speaking at 30,000 feet, but we can dig into it.
No, it makes sense to me. I am reminded of the crisis in English history that occurred, I think in the 1830s, where Parliament passed a reform bill and the Lords vetoed it, and they immediately went to an election, and the House of Commons majority was returned, and the Lords threatened to veto it again, and the King said, then I will create as many Lords as is necessary to uphold the bill. And then the Lords passed it. That's a constitutional crisis. You might be in one if they strike this law down. I don't think you're in one right now.
We might be in one, but attacking the court is something the Knesset has an explicit power to do. The size of the court is based on the basic law of the judiciary, and the Knesset can change the basic law of the judiciary. In the end, the Knesset will win. I do really appreciate, I don't like how the right has done this. I don't like how the right has tried to reform the court very badly and very aggressively in ways that frankly played into the court's own argument about its power and the necessity for its power. And again, we can get into it, but the right really overstepped this. There are very few people on the Israeli right today that don't think that the right mishandled this very badly. But at the same time, I don't mind a constitutional crisis that forces everyone to solve this for a very simple reason. Israel's democracy is so fundamental and built in so deeply to its culture. We don't have a freedom of speech anywhere in Israeli law. We don't have freedom of religious practice. We don't have freedom of assembly. We don't have almost any freedoms at all. Incidentally, Australia has no Bill of Rights also, and never really needed one because it's so built into the culture. So we are one of those democracies that demonstrate that democracy really can flow from culture and not from complex constitutions. I think now things are a little bit falling apart because the country is so big and the population is so much bigger, wealth, power, questions of war, questions of justice, questions of minorities. We can no longer just kind of live off the culture of democracy. So that culture is there. It's not going to fall apart, but we do need to start getting seriously thinking about constitutions.
And that brings me to the second big question. Pause right there. Part 2 of my interview with Haviv will be in hour 3. Good opportunity for me to tell you. I've been interviewing Haviv Reddy Gur since the beginning of the war on 10/7/23. And he's quickly become a go-to guest, like many of my go-to guests. We've got Byron York today. I've got Lilacs coming along. We also have John Allen and Amy Parnes coming up next hour. And I cover Israeli politics in the war because it's a hot spot in the Middle East, the way I cover Ukraine and Russia, the way I cover China and Taiwan. I cover our allies, especially Israel, which is the equal of any of our allies. I got word today that a squadron of A-10s was deployed to the Middle East. That's pretty odd. A-10s, I'm not a pilot, nor did I stay in a Holiday Inn, but they're for the close support of infantry. So I really don't know what they're going to use A-10s for in the Middle East, but I know the B-2s are at Diego Garcia, and Donald Trump is upping the pressure every single day. So I cover our allies. I think because I cover our allies, I have a new sponsor, which is the Israeli Ministry of Tourism on behalf of the government of Israel. And I said, you bet I'll take them as a sponsor. I've enjoyed both of my trips to Israel. I think everyone ought to go to Israel. You can visit goisrael.com and plan your own trip. Whenever someone goes to Israel that I know, I always say to them, do it all. Go to the Dead Sea. By all means, go up to Galilee if you're a Christian and you want to see where Jesus is from. Go to Caesarea. Go everywhere. Go to the temple. The one place you have to go, though, is the tunnel. Now, everyone says you've got to go to the Western Wall, and that's true. The holiest spot for Jews in the world. But I think the holiest spot on the planet is the tunnel that takes you down next to the Holy of Holies. The Israelis have not broken through the foundations of the temple. And it's really quite remarkable. These stones are so massive. I don't know how they built it. I have no idea how it's the second temple, right? It's not the first temple. But the second temple was destroyed as effectively as anything could be destroyed, but not even the Romans could destroy the second temple completely. And these blocks are amazing. And outside of where the Israelis believe, if you were to penetrate the stones, would be the Holy of Holies, there's a synagogue. And people are praying. And it's really quite a remarkable place. And I've been in the tunnel twice, both of my trips to Israel. I've done both the tourist thing and the government thing. I went as a tourist with a scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls who explained to us where they were found and how they were recovered and how they were studied. And it's really remarkable. But I also went as part of a press delegation with a national security advisor, then National Security Advisor Bolton, as we visited Israel and Turkey during delicate negotiations. And that's a kind of an experience as well. I was sitting in the King David Hotel where the delegation stayed, and a New Yorker came over and said, hey, I love your show. Never met the guy before or since. We've talked a little bit since. So it's an amazing place. It's really one of the most amazing places I've ever been. I've been lucky enough to be all over the world. You should make a plan to visit Israel now. Go to goisrael.com, goisrael.com, make a plan. Very safe. The war is effectively over in Israel. They've beaten Hezbollah. They are beating Hamas. There are no more rockets. It's safe. You can go. Now's a good time to go. And pretty soon, Iran is also going to be reduced to absolutely no offensive punch whatsoever. Make a plan. GoIsrael.com. Coming up after the break, Lieutenant General Dan Kane, who's going to be the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, gave testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee today. I'm going to play you 5.5 minutes of that. Don't miss it. However, I want to start by my friend Jim Banks. Senator Banks, been a friend of mine for a long time. He was House Member Banks. He ought to have been the ranking minority member of a legitimate J6 committee that Nancy Pelosi had every right to put into place. Once she vetoed Jim Banks as the chair and then began picking the Republicans' members, it became illegitimate. I've not paid a lick of attention to it ever since. Complete show trial. But Jim Banks simply ran for the Senate and won handily. He's going to be a member of the Senate forever. And he had an exchange today with a guy in the Senate hallway. Now, I want to play it for you, but I give you this. I am of the opinion that even journalists who stop members of Congress to try and get a quote out of them as they're walking from point A to point B are clowns. So I think everyone who bothers legislators when they're trying to work are clowns. It's perfectly legal. I think they ought to change the rules. I think it's exceptionally dangerous. This exchange happened today, cut number 11.
To call to the Congress.
Hi, I was a worker at HHS. I was fired illegally on February 14th. There are many people who are not getting social service programs, especially people with disabilities. Are you going to do anything to stop what's happening?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it.
Dude,
Wow.
That's sad.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Why did I deserve it?
Because you seem like a clown.
Okay, sir, you shouldn't have said that.
And then, oh, sir, you shouldn't have said that. Yeah, actually, that's gone viral for the right reasons. Most Americans, I think most normal Americans, first question is, are you really from HHS? Were you really fired? If you were fired, were you really fired wrongly? If you were fired wrongly, what are you doing here and not getting a job? And by the way, the stuff about disabled people not getting their benefits, I don't believe that either. So I'm going to play it again with that background. I want you to make sure you hear it. I think Jim Banks gets gold stars for this, 5 stars, whatever you want to hand out. Cut number 11.
Hi, I was a worker at HHS. I was fired illegally on February 14th. There are many people who are not getting social service programs, especially people with disabilities. Are you going to do anything to stop what's happening?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it.
Dude,
Wow.
That's sad.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Why did I deserve it?
Because you seem like a clown.
Okay, sir, you shouldn't have said that.
I don't know who's with her. I don't know who is with him. The guy who says, I was fired illegally on February 14th. All right. Don't know if that's true. Might be true. Don't know if it was illegal. Might be true. There are some people not getting Social Security, especially those on disability. Don't believe it. I haven't seen any evidence of that. And what do you think? Said, you probably deserved it. And you know what? What do you think, Dwayne?
I think he did deserve it.
He may have deserved it. I don't know. I do not blame Jim Banks at
Full
all.
marks to whoever was controlling the elevator door to close the doors at the exact perfect second.
That was absolutely serendipitous, and Jim Banks is a hero. Speaking of which, by the way, I'm not going to play any April Fool's jokes on you because you're immune.
I'm immune because I'm inoculated. I've worked for you for 30 years.
30 years, and therefore you've taken. But I scored a couple of points on the kids today, which was good. I'm not going to discuss the details, but I'm not going to. This is not an April Fool's joke. Dwayne really did lose 50 pounds on my PhD weightloss.com,
644-1900.
That's
864-644-1900.
1900. And he did not buy a purple shirt as a result, did you?
I did buy purple shirts.
Well, that's the April Fool's joke.
Why is that a joke?
Because that shirt sure is a joke. I thought that was the joke. And you weren't wearing it today. I was disappointed because I was going to do the whole shtick on the purple shirt that you bought when you got to be Skinny Dwayne.
I have more than one purple shirt, actually.
Well, did the Angels win or lose last night?
I don't know. I didn't look.
The Guardians lost after being up 2-0 on the Padres.
Okay, well then, more than likely, I don't know what the Angels did.
We lost 7-3, and it was Luis Ortiz, so I'm not surprised by that. But while the Guardians lost, you don't need to lose unless you need to lose weight. You go to myphdweightloss.com,
864-644-1900. It's a
Can
lot
we hear-
less painful than watching the Guardians lose.
Can we hear Jim Banks one more time? Cut 11.
Hi, I was a worker at HHS. I was fired illegally on February 14th. There are many people who are not getting social service programs, especially people with disabilities. Are you going to do anything to stop what's happening?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it.
Dude,
Wow.
That's sad.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
It's the other voice. It's the voice coming in from the side.
So he allegedly gets fired on February 14th, Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
right? You're telling me he can't find a job in 2 months?
Well, not only that, but there's that girl on the side. Oh, that's so mean. No, it's not mean. Just leave people alone at work. It's not mean. Lieutenant General Dan Kane, call sign Raisin, as in Raisin Cane, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee today in his confirmation proceeding to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Here are his opening comments, cut number 3.
Thank you, Senator. Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, members of this committee. My name is Dan Kane, and I am honored and humbled to sit before you today as the President's nominee to be the 22nd Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'd like to start by thanking the President and the Secretary for their trust and confidence in me, and if confirmed, allowing me to again serve our great nation. I'd also like to thank General C.Q. Brown and his wife Shireen and their family for their more than 40 years of selfless service to our nation. I'd like to thank the team that helped prepare me for this hearing today. And finally, I'd like to thank my family and friends who have given me so much. It is my family who has made my service possible, always at their own expense. They have given more than I have, and there are not words to express my thanks to each of them, especially my family in our nation's Midwest. I sit here before you, the proud son of an Air Force fighter pilot who flew F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam. My mom was a pediatric critical care nurse who worked nights so she could be home when my sister and I got up in the morning and when we got home in the afternoon. I learned about service from my parents and the other members of my family who served not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. In our family, we serve. When asked, we always say yes. Senators, I acknowledge that I'm an unconventional nominee. These are unconventional times. It is 9:48 p.m. in Beijing, 6:48 p.m. in Tehran, 4:48 p.m. in Moscow, and 10:48 p.m. in Pyongyang. As we sit here now, our nation faces an unprecedented rising global risk. Our adversaries are advancing, global nuclear threats are on the rise, and deterrence is paramount. Our national defense requires urgent action and reform across the board. We must go faster. We must move with a sense of urgency. We can never forget that our number one job is to create peace through overwhelming strength, and if need be, fight and win our nation's wars. I realize for many Americans I'm an unknown leader, and it is with a heart full of gratitude that I've been given a truly unique set of experiences that I believe have prepared me to be the 22nd chairman. For the past 34 years, I've served in the active Title 10 force, in the Title 32 National Guard force, in the Title 50 force at the CIA. I've served in the interagency at the White House, and I've deployed in combat as a fighter pilot, a special operations officer, and a CIA officer. And I've been an entrepreneur and investor in the business sector while a citizen soldier in the National Guard. As a general officer, I've had the privilege of serving 3 presidents from both political parties, and most recently was the Associate Director for Military Affairs at the CIA, a job where I was charged to provide military advice to the Director of the CIA and globally integrate DOD and CIA activities across the world. Along the way, I've proudly served alongside some of America's most incredible warriors and civilian teammates and their families, and I've witnessed them do awe-inspiring things in the service of our nation, and to a person, they've poured more into me than I could ever have poured into them, especially our non-commissioned officer corps. And sadly, I've been there with them as they made the ultimate sacrifice on the fields of battle, and been with their families as we told them of their loved ones' service and sacrifice. I think of our fallen every single day. These experiences help me to better understand how our nation considers and uses military force to achieve our national security objectives, and they directly inform my views of the importance of carefully considering the use of that force and the risks associated with it beforehand, and always asking the important question, and then what, before we do. And if the decision is made to use military force, crushing our enemies and winning. I've also had the privilege of serving alongside incredible business leaders, starting and scaling companies as an entrepreneur. And along the way, I learned what a different kind of grit looks like. Our American entrepreneurial spirit is a force multiplier, and my time as an entrepreneur has made me a better general officer and leader. And if confirmed, I'll bring more of that spirit into the joint force. Senators, I'm here today to earn your trust and the trust of the American people. If confirmed, I'll continue to work as I have for my entire 34 years in uniform, always focused on the mission and our incredible people. If confirmed, I'll continue the traditions and standards of my oath of office and my commission as a nonpartisan leader who will always strive to do the right thing. Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and members of the committee, thank you for your time and your consideration. As we gather here today, let us never forget our deployed forces and their families, and may we always remember our fallen and their families, especially those 3 that Senator Reed mentioned and our 1 missing. I look forward to your questions.
He is referring to the fact that 3 of our soldiers went missing and died, I believe, in Estonia, or was it Lithuania, and 1 continues to be missing on some sort of an exercise. That's a serious man, and it was a serious statement, and these are serious times. There are, as I said, B-2s in force at Diego Garcia. A-10s have deployed to the Middle East, which I'm a civilian. I don't know why they would be there, but suppression of IRGC ground troops in Yemen, maybe. I don't know. The whole deal about the world right now is we are on the edge of a conflict with Iran, and we need serious people to take this very, very seriously. It's the biggest story in the world, and nobody seems to be paying attention to it in legacy media. And I don't understand why. I've covered it every day for 4 days, and I remind you again, we don't send B-2s to Diego Garcia on exercises, not in those numbers. We send them to send a message to Iran that President Trump is very serious. You can denuclearize with our cooperation and peacefully, or you can denuclearize with our bombers and pay a price. It's up to the mullahs. Coming up, an interview with John Allen and Amy Parnes about this blockbuster book, Fight. I recorded it yesterday. It's embargoed until today. It is a blockbuster book, largely because it reveals that we were without a president for extended periods of time for at least 2 years. He was impaired. We knew that. I always use the word infirm. This has got the goods. I'll talk about it with John and Amy after the break. I'm speaking of books. I think I'm going to PragerU this weekend to tape a Michael Knowles interview about a book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And they asked me, what book do you want to talk about? I said, well, most impactful book on my life outside of Scripture is One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Let's talk about that. So I'm rereading it this morning. I mean, it's a gripping book. It's a very short book. It's 160 pages. It's a novel. Solzhenitsyn got out of the Soviet Union, the greatest writer of the 20th century, because of this little book. And it's an amazing book. Made me an anti-communist before I even knew what communism was. And I read it in the 8th grade, I think. My brother was 5 years older than me and brought it back from college, and I read it one summer. Might have been 7th grade. Had this profound impact on me. And so I'm reading it this morning. I get so engrossed in it, I forget I had a doctor's appointment. I forget to get out. I didn't do anything. I'm about to take my relief factor. I don't deserve it. I didn't do anything except read this morning, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. That hardly causes aches and pains. It causes great heartache for the people who lived in the Gulag for years and years at a time. But I'm taking my relief factor right now. And I'll tell you what, I don't miss a day even when I forget to go. That happens sometimes. Especially Mrs. Hewitt comes back tomorrow. She would not have allowed me to both miss a doctor's appointment and not go up the implacable hill. But I just started out early drinking coffee and reading this book and got lost track of time. Looked up and said, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be here. I'm not there. And then I've got to be over at the studio. And I was screwed up. But Relief Factor works. I take it every day, and I'll go up the implacable hill in the morning, and I'll be fine because I take Relief Factor every day. Call 1-800 the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800 the number 4 and the word relief, or go to their website and look for the starter pack for $19.95, less than $1 a day, 3 weeks worth of Relief Factor. You try it for 3 weeks. Get the levels of icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega up in your body, and you'll feel better, and you'll thank me. Go to relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Speaking of Prager University, here's a little touch of Pragertopia and featuring Adam Carolla.
Adam Carolla is a new find in my life.
Your producer, Sean, somehow put us together because he heard me saying good things about you on my podcast. And I was always a big fan of yours, but I knew I'd have to infiltrate this place. And I used Sean as my predator drone.
He was a predator drone. He did get in. If you're missing Dennis until his return in June, go and join Pragertopia and get a fix every day. A lot of you are rightly Dennis addicts, and the Dennis addicts out there have known for a while. But if you are one of those and you've just been gone through cold turkey, go get Pragertopia until Dennis returns in June. As promised, this is the hour. This book dropped today, Fight. Fight is the inside the wildest battle for the White House. It's by Jonathan Allen of NBC News, Amy Parnes of The Hill. John and Amy have been guests before when they've written bestsellers. Fight is going to be a bestseller. Might occasion a few duels on the mall between a few people. But John and Amy, welcome. John, of course, let me begin with you if I can. Have you had any early reaction from the people that you profile in this book? Are they angry?
There are definitely some people who are angry and some people who are going to get angrier. But really what this book is deep inside all of the campaigns, the Trump campaign, Biden campaign, what became the Harris campaign, the relationships within the Democratic Party that, that frayed, the cannibalization that happened within the Democratic Party after the Biden-Trump debate. And, as you know, we've talked to you about multiple books before. I really believe Amy and I are as good as any reporters at really getting to the truth of what happened.
I'm going to get into some details, but I'm going to start with the same question to you, Amy, who's on the phone. Anybody call you up yet to say, I'm never talking to you again and we're never having lunch and don't even come near my house?
It's getting there.
Yeah.
But, our job as reporters, Hugh, and that's what makes our books good, I think, is that we call balls and strikes on all sides. And that's the job of this book, is to tell people what really happened without any of the pretense, and that is what you'll get in this book.
Now, I want to go to a detail. It's a minor detail, but it proves to my audience, which is center-right to conservative, that you can trust this book. This is the kind of detail that validates from my audience that John and Amy have done their job. It's on page 213 to 221. It's the story of the ABC News debate hosted by David Muir and Lindsay Davis with President Trump and then Vice President Harris. And I'm quoting, quote, "What the F is this?" Close quote. Chris LaCivita, a retired Marine, bellowed at ABC News producer John Santucci when the campaign convoy caught up with him in a hallway outside the studio. Quote, "This is an F job." And the reply from Mr. Santucci, quote, "We are in the control room. We are in the ears," Santucci said, suggesting that the executives were pressing the moderators to dial it back. "We are trying." That's on page 218. This, to me, John Allen, tells me a great deal. You and I have done debate prep before. What's it tell you about what Santucci was saying to LaCivita?
Yeah, we've done debate prep literally together before, Hugh. And look, what it tells me is that that the ABC producer thought that the campaign was right to be angry, that the instant fact check was not the plan, and that the moderators were doing their own their own idea of what this should have been, that it wasn't part of the rules, and that, of course, the producer in that position is between the campaign that's angry about what's going on with these instant fact checks on the one side, and then the moderators on the other who work with that producer. It's a tough position to be in. Credit where it's due to the Tucker Carlson service, where they've done a big documentary, and so some of that is that we described is memorialized in video that we were able to review by subscribing, and we did our own reporting here, but there wasn't supposed to be that kind of one-sided fact checking, and the Trump campaign was rightly angry that was going on during the debate.
Amy, do you think the moderators went rogue, or do you think that ABC planned to sabotage Trump?
I think they did their job, but I think that there were a lot of people I heard from that night who felt the way that you just described, and I think that that's why people see people in the news business as not being straight. But I do think that that was very much a view of some.
But do you think it was the moderators or was it ABC's plan? NBC, with whom I have worked, CNN, with whom I have worked on presidential debates, did not have a plan to go rogue. There was no opportunity. We knew what we were going to do, and John can confirm that. Amy, do you think the moderators went rogue or that ABC planned to torpedo Trump?
I don't think they planned to torpedo it, and it's hard to go inside and describe what really happened, but I think they did. I know because I heard from people that they were really, really upset about it.
Oh, well, they should have been. In fact, I think the debate ended up, it's interesting, if I can go a couple pages later, John, you write that J.D. Vance says to Trump over at the spin room, "I think you killed her," Vance tells Trump. Then you throw a dart like a stormtrooper under the influence of a Jedi mind trick. I disagree with that, John. Then you quote Rubio. I think the people analyze it and the way real voters analyze it are very different. I think he's right and that the people saw that and thought Trump got screwed. So I think J.D. Vance was actually right, John. Do you think it's right to call him a stormtrooper and a Jedi mind trick? I'm trying to save your credibility with my audience here.
It was an opportunity for I think a clever line. I hope a clever line. Look, I think J.D. Vance was right that Trump got his point across, and I also think that Rubio was right that there were different interpretations, and in Rubio's view, the one that mattered was the one at home, right? Not what the Beltway insiders were going to take from the debate, not what necessarily the moderators would take from the debate, but what folks at home were going to see. And by the way, folks at home don't want to see a debate that they think the referees are pushing down on one side. So I understand the umbrage you take at the description of the description of J.D. Vance and what he said. I just thought it was funny, that his boss basically comes out and he goes, "You killed her. You killed her." Very cheerleading compared to Marco Rubio's slightly more nuanced version of it.
Well, everyone is a prisoner of their own experience. I watched it with a Hollywood producer who got up and said, "Trump's over. He insulted Taylor Swift, and they're killing the dog. They're eating the dogs." Amy, you guys went around and talked to everyone where they watched. I thought it was excellent reporting, by the way, on the first debate, the Trump-Biden debate. When did you come upon that scheme to just collect impressions at the time that it happened? Because it works really well.
I mean, we were hearing from people in real time that night, Hugh, and I think we started there because that's where the book starts, because that's where things really got interesting. I mean, Biden clearly bombed that night, and my phone was blowing up. Everyone's phone was blowing up. Nancy Pelosi, as we report in this book, she's sitting in her living room alone. It's almost like she knows that this is about to happen, and she's not with anyone. Jim Clyburn, also alone, having a drink by himself. People were feeling insecure about how things might go that night, and their phones are blowing up. And what we do is we do a 360, and we take you inside all the Democratic leaders in that moment, and you can watch the train wreck unfold from there.
I loved it. I loved it as a Republican, but I got to tell you, it was very good reporting. Now, John, I want to make a statement. I think the days from June 27th, which are the day of the debate, until July 21st, when Joe Biden drops out, are the most interesting 24 days in American modern political history. I think those are the most interesting, pressure-packed 24 days you can pick. Now, 9/11 is a national crisis, obviously, that requires a response. But in terms of just pure politics, does anything compare with those 24 days?
No, absolutely not. 24 days that shook the world. Amy and I weren't even planning to write a book about this campaign until that debate happened. And then the debate happened. The publisher reached out, said, "Would you guys be willing to write a book?" And we said, "This is the most fascinating time in American politics." And to just remind everybody, you go from that debate, we do all the deep reporting on what's going on in the Democratic Party as they start to tear each other apart, knives out, backstabbing going on, relationships fraying, longtime friends becoming enemies. And then, within that time period, you also have an assassination attempt. The first assassination attempt on Donald Trump the first thing like that in, I'm trying to do my math here, but basically 45 years, since Reagan was shot, and of course he was not campaigning at that time. This horrible moment in American history where a candidate for president, a nominee of a party, a former president, gets shot. That happens within that time frame. Donald Trump also chooses J.D. Vance as his vice presidential candidate in that time frame. So, and then Joe Biden steps aside in something that we have not seen in modern politics, which is someone who has already basically clinched their nomination, deciding that they're not going to continue to run. All of this unprecedented and just jam-packed into 24 days. And it's one of the reasons that I think this book reads so fast, it is so propulsive, because there is so much going on in such
Propulsive is a great word. Propulsive is a great word, and it's a great place to pause. The book is Fight, Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. Coming up, the rest of the hour, I'm talking to John and Amy. The book released yesterday. I released this morning. It was embargoed yesterday when I taped the interview. I read it over the weekend. I made copious notes, and there are many, many stories to tell. I mean, many, many more stories. And the most important one of all, Joe Biden was not competent to be president for much of his last 2, maybe 3 years in office. There's no avoiding that. It's a national scandal. It will forever stain the reputations of the people who covered it up. And this is the first of many books that will expose it. Boom, boom, boom is what's gone off after the publication of Fight, the brand new book by John Allen and Amy Parnes. We return to my interview with them taped yesterday. I mean, it's a page turner, especially those 24 days. And Amy, at the end of it, I always keep at the back of a book notes of things, and I'm just holding it up so people have things I got to ask you about, and then I make my outline, etc. I think Nancy's new nickname, Nancy Pelosi, is Nancy the Knife. She absolutely filleted Joe Biden. She did it, didn't she? It was Nancy the Knife who put the blade in.
Oh, yeah, but, Nancy Pelosi's greatest secret, or maybe worst kept secret, is that, she doesn't want fingerprints on this. And so she basically says now, like, she did nothing. But
there are fingerprints. I've got the autopsy in my hand. The book Fight is an autopsy of what happened, and she killed him. And they're going to be mad at each other forever. I don't think they're ever going to get together again, do you?
We report that.
No.
He actually does not like her at all and will never speak to her again. And we report that in this book as well. But yeah, she knifed him and then kept turning the knife.
All right. So we don't know what the biggest headlines are out of Fight. I think one of the big headlines is going to be that Muir and Davis went rogue. But I want to point to two people, to the dog that didn't bark, John. The names Sullivan and Blinken are not in Fight. Now, I think I read the book pretty closely. There is no index. Am I correct that the names Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken are not in Fight?
I believe they are not in Fight, Hugh.
Now, the reason this alarms me, is that the country was without a president probably from the moment that Kevin McCarthy does his walk around, which I believe is in September of 2022. That you guys detail a very scary moment when the president is clearly non-compos mentis. We don't have a president from July of 2022. We have a regency. And I think that regency is made up of Sullivan, Blinken, and Dr. Jill Biden. Amy, what do you think? Who ran the country during his episodes?
I mean, don't forget, there's a crew of loyalists, including Ron Klain, the chief of staff, who was with him for most of the first term, Steve Ricchetti, Mike Donnellan, all of these people. These are the people that people are blaming right now for kind of keeping this a secret. But these are his closest aides. They've been around him for a long time. And a lot of people say they were essentially running the country at the time.
The thing that will stun people, I really do think they'll be stunned. The closest advisor to Joe Biden is Hunter Biden. On page 80, for example, John Allen, you point out Hunter Biden had pushed Anita Dunn, maybe the savviest and most experienced operative in this whole world. Some people are going to argue that JOD is, but it's really Anita Dunn. She's pushed out by Hunter Biden. Why in the world would anyone trust Hunter Biden? I mean, I'm glad he's in recovery. He's an addict. He's a bad guy. He's compromised the campaign. He's a felon. Why would they do that?
Just shows such terrible judgment on the part of the president. Who it's one thing to stick by your child when they're going through recovery. And, I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody blames Joe Biden for giving love and support to his son, but to bring his son in as a political advisor, who has an axe to grind against some of the other political advisors, particularly Dunn and Bauer. Dunn and Bauer, her husband Bob Bauer, who was Joe Biden's personal lawyer, were advising the president during his presidency that he should stay away from Hunter Biden, that he should not leave any perception that he is fiddling in the Justice Department, that he is making arguments on behalf of his son's legal case. And Hunter Biden hated that because he watches Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is out there in public defending himself. And Hunter Biden wanted his father to do the same thing. And we saw Joe Biden caught betwixt and between there, right? There were times when he was quieter, times when he was louder. But Hunter really did not like that about Dunn and Bauer. And a lot of people in the Democratic Party are uncomfortable with Anita Dunn's revolving door policy, meaning she's revolved in and out of the White House into the private sector, made a lot of money. And I think ultimately Hunter Biden didn't trust, no longer trusted Anita Dunn to give his father the best advice. I think the First Lady was in the same place. And ultimately what you see is after that debate, Anita Dunn ends up being kind of the fall person, in part because she was one of the people, maybe the only person, internally, who originally said Biden shouldn't debate Trump, and then eventually she was outvoted.
She was right. She was right. Now I'm glad that they did, or the scam might have gone on, and we'd be stuck with Woodrow Wilson for another 4 years. Amy, I want to point out, Kevin McCarthy's a Republican, so people might dismiss his September 2022 concern that holy S, the president is not with it. The guy literally lost his mind. But let's go over to the other side of the aisle. You've got Eric Swalwell at the White House picnic in June 2023 telling you that he has concerns that his mental acuity is gone. So it's not just Kevin McCarthy. It's also Eric Swalwell. How many people knew, do you think?
I mean, it's clear to me that everyone saw it. I mean, there are people who have these stories. Swalwell was, he ran against him in the primary in 2020. This is a rank and file member, but he's very, he has a big, large profile. He had to kind of cue the president at the time to remind him who he was. And I think that was startling to him and other people. And, we've heard other stories from people who went to him and they also had to remind him. We have stories in this book that have never been revealed about how he would start his day with a makeup crew.
Oh my gosh! It's so it's so troubling that this could be hidden. That's what.
And he missed some meetings because of that.
I think what people will take away from Fight is that a whole bunch of people betrayed their oath to the country by not revealing that the 25th Amendment needed to be invoked. All right, let's pause it there. I'll come back. I do want to talk to you about my sponsor, AndrewandTodd.com. I hope John and Amy don't have to leave Washington. This book is really scandalous, and it's well reported by two very well-respected reporters, and boy, people are going to be mad at them. And if they do, I hope they don't have to move to Palo Alto. AndrewandTodd.com are my sponsor. They're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend you money to buy a house. I was checking the story wire on homes in America. A sale closed in Palo Alto on a 3-bedroom home, 1,600 square feet. What do you think, Dwayne? 1,600 square feet in Palo Alto this week. That's a 3-bedroom.
What it's going to cost, you mean?
Yeah, it closed. 3-bedroom.
$8 million.
$8 million is it. $8 million is on the nose. That comes down to $4,831 per square foot in Palo Alto. So I looked up the national average. The national average per square foot for a house in America is $224. Inside the Beltway, it's about $400. So that means it is, my gosh, that's ridiculous. It's just crazy. It's 10 times as expensive as the Beltway, which is a crazy expense. The richest zip codes. There aren't that many houses in Palo Alto. Stanford owns anything. So I don't want you to move to Palo Alto or the Beltway. But wherever you're moving, call Andrew and Todd to do it. 888-888-1172. AndrewandTodd.com is their website. Fill out all the information. They'll get back to you. Or you can just call them up first and say, I'm going from A to B. I have to move. I have to move to Palo Alto, heart attack. But whatever your situation is, they will help you get the loan. If you're a veteran, no money down, first-time home buyer, FHA, You want to get a home equity line of credit, whatever it is. AndrewandTodd.com, 888-1172. Or Nancy the Knife Pelosi. I'm back. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm talking with Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes about this book, Fight. It is currently number 7 on the Amazon bestsellers list. It is the first of at least 3 books that will be arriving within a month. Alex Eisenstadt's Revenge comes out at the end of the week. I haven't received that yet. I'll read them all because they all have different details, but this one's pretty devastating. Let's go back to the interview I taped yesterday with John Allen and Amy Parnes. And I was with Donald Trump on the day that the debate challenge was issued. It was May 15th, I believe. I was on the air with him, and he said, I'm going to talk to him anytime, anywhere. I've already accepted. Why don't you look at True Social? And he had accepted. And I asked him, do you think if his infirmity increases, will they dump him, Mr. President, at the convention, replace him with Kamala or Godman or someone else? Donald Trump says, I do. Yet you guys seem to portray Donald Trump as being angry when he gets the heave-ho. John, was Donald Trump mad when Joe Biden got the heave-ho?
Absolutely, because he had just beaten Joe Biden, beaten him so badly that Joe Biden had to be replaced in the ring. How many times, if you're Donald Trump, do you have to win this election? And so I think he looked at it and thought, this is ridiculous. They're going to put up another candidate. Even though he, had long believed that that was a possibility, when it comes to fruition, he's angry about it. And look, there are, each of the parties has its own manner for trying to replace a candidate if a candidate withdraws. But, he looked at it and said, this isn't fair. They pulled their candidate. Their candidate was going to lose, so they grabbed somebody else. And I think that, look, as a political argument, I think it was extremely helpful to Donald Trump. I think a lot of Americans looked at what was going on the Democratic side and said, look, these people have gaslit us about Joe Biden's condition for a long time. They gaslit us about the economy and inflation. They gaslit us about Afghanistan. And now they're changing candidates. And you put all that together, and I think it was hard for a lot of people who were on the fence between Trump and Biden to look at the Democrats and say to themselves, this is the party I want to go with.
Amy Parnes, a killer line on page 281. Kamala Harris had been gaslit too. That's a devastating. Her own team didn't tell her the truth, and it's just amazing to me that you got that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what this book does, what we aim to do, is take you inside these rooms. We take you inside her room when she finds out that she's losing and that she has lost in the final hours of the campaign. We take you inside Tim Walz's room, his hotel room at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, where he is also shocked to learn that they had lost. They did not go into this thinking that they were losing or that they would lose. They thought that they were going to win, and both of them are shocked in the end. And that is something that will really surprise anyone who reads this book.
What else is going to survive? I think, John Allen, I'm going to turn to you about this. President Obama is a villain in this book. Not because you make him a villain, but because he doesn't want Kamala Harris to get the nomination. He intrigues, but he doesn't intrigue. He says things, but he never quite says things. He puts his people in, he takes his people out. He's kind of a Yago. I mean, he's a sinister presence in the book. And I'm reading like a fair guy. I'm trying to be fair to everyone here. There aren't any heroes. Biden's not a hero. Pelosi's not a hero. Schumer's awful. Harris was just not competent to be a candidate. But Obama is just Yago.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say if there are heroes in the book, I would give you a couple thoughts. One is, Susie Wiles on the
Susie
Republican
Wiles,
side.
Chris LaCivita, and Donald Trump are the heroes. And Barron Trump, by the way, Barron Trump.
And Barron Trump, who does a good job of getting his father on non-traditional media to go talk to folks who have big audiences that aren't necessarily focused on politics and talk to them about why they should be interested in Donald Trump. I would also say, on Pelosi's side, and she does the most incredible maneuvering, as you said, Nancy the Knife. Unlike the other Democrats in this, at least her North Star was what she thought was best for the party and what she thought was, which is what she thought was best for the country. She's guided by that, whereas all of these other people are guided sort of by their personal interests, especially Joe Biden. Joe Biden more than anybody, but Barack Obama as well. Chuck Schumer, who's out there, taking victory laps now as though he was the one that pushed Biden out of the race because he thinks the Democrats like that. When in fact it was Pelosi who had to take on a job that nobody else was really willing to do. But as far as Obama goes, I mean, here's a guy who, never thought Joe Biden was any good, didn't want him to run in 16, didn't want him to run in 20, has lost his influence with Joe Biden because of that, decides that he wants to have a mini primary or an open convention. So he's going to wants to skip over Kamala Harris, which would have absolutely destroyed the Democratic Party, maybe for generations. I mean, taking what we know about the Democratic Party and its values and its mores, the idea that they were going to skip over the first black woman vice president in some sort of Fantasyland miracle three-week primary is just sort of ridiculous. And
it is ridiculous. That's the perfect bump for the book, Fight, by John Allen and Amy Parnes. Let's go back to my interview that I taped with the authors yesterday.
He wants to be the person that is making things happen without anyone ever seeing him make those things happen or without rolling up his sleeves. And honestly, that was a lot of the problem with Obama as president in terms of his legislative agenda. He always wanted things to move without him having to get his hands dirty. Nancy Pelosi ended up being the person that moved things for him a lot. But I think, out of this, what you see is Barack Obama having, a much smaller level of influence than he had before this election, and in large part because of his own actions. And
it's interesting observation out in the book. I think this book is going to wipe out a class of Democrats and reduce their influence dramatically because they're also incompetent. Amy, it's a novelist trick. Don't tell people what's happening. Show them what's happening. You show us that the vice president cannot do interviews, and you show us the reaction to the Sunny Houston question where she's stunned and say, I can't, not a single thing comes into my head. You don't have to say anything. It's right there. Everyone around her says, oh my God, she can't do interviews.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction was, first of all, they had prepped her for that question. They had practiced that question. But yeah, it was a little bit concerning for people. And remember, at the time, Democrats really wanted her to go out and do more interviews. But we report for the first time in this book that the president at the time, President Biden, was essentially telling her, no daylight, kid, no daylight. And so we know that there was this signal from him that he didn't want her to kind of go off on her own and run her own campaign. He wanted her to, stand beside him. And that's not something that you really want to do as a candidate. You do want to run your own campaign, and she had essentially inherited his campaign.
Well, one thing I remembered for the first time, I think I probably knew this during the campaign, John. It may have been mentioned, but I had forgotten it. The vice president turned over the vetting of her vice presidential picks to Eric Holder. Now, Eric Holder and Barack Obama are very close. So she's in essence farming out her vice presidential pick to Barack Obama's right-hand guy. And he can't figure out that Tim Walz is a buffoon? Aren't you kind of astonished?
I mean, I think they ended up with very few choices, Hugh. I mean, at the end of the day, and we report on this in the book, Josh Shapiro is the pick that Republicans are worried about. That Trump and his team look at Shapiro and say, like, well, that guy's the governor of Pennsylvania. He's pro-Israel. He's better for the Democrats' message and worse for the Trump message than these other candidates. But Josh Shapiro walks in very arrogantly and basically says, "This is what I would want to do as vice president."
By the way, I don't think it's arrogant. I don't think he wanted the job. He knew they were going to lose. That's what I think.
That's exactly where I was going to go, Hugh. There are different viewpoints on this, and I'm not sure he would ever acknowledge sabotaging himself, but certainly what he did when he went in there sabotaged him and preserved him for a future presidential run. I absolutely agree with you that he better than anybody else, the sitting governor of Pennsylvania, knows how the state is going. And I think he looked at the Trump-Harris matchup and understood that there was very little chance that Harris was going to win Pennsylvania, and that if he tacked on with her, that would harm him in the future. I can't prove that he sabotaged himself, but he certainly left himself in a much better position today than he would have been had he run with Harris and lost.
Amy, we're running low on time here, so I want to ask a couple of quick exit questions. I don't know if you can say this or not. Did President Trump, Susie Wiles, and or Chris LaCivita sit down with you off the record or on background?
We don't talk about our interviews and who we speak to, Hugh. We've never done that. We've never done so with any of our books.
That's what I thought you would say. It is my opinion, having read the book closely, that The president talked to you. Susie Wiles definitely talked to you, and Chris LaCivita definitely talked to you, and they're the only three that matter. I want to know, John, about the fact, I mean, Tony West, I know who that is. Lorraine Voles, no idea. Sheila Nix, no idea. Brian Fallon, I know he's an incompetent buffoon. I've never heard of Sean Clegg before. Who are all these people that I've been doing this for 35 years? Did she get, like, people off the street to run her campaign?
Well, I would put it this way, Hugh. For the most part, the most powerful people in that campaign continue to be Joe Biden people, which is one of the reasons she was so shackled in terms of, or so hamstrung in terms of her ability to break from him, right? Like, they've all been running this losing campaign, and they think that it's such a great campaign, and they keep running basically the same campaign with a new candidate. And the people around her, by and large, are the people that didn't make it onto the Biden team. Right, that's who surrounds a vice president. So, I'm not going to take shots at any of them personally.
John, question for you: do you have any knowledge of who put the president on TV opposite Kamala Harris on the mall, stepping on her story, and in essence killing her last chance of coming back?
I don't know who specifically did it, but you absolutely nailed it on the head. She's out there giving her big last speech from the foot of the White House, basically, and he's there calling Trump's supporters garbage. I mean, Hillary Clinton had the presence of mind to at least make it a fraction of Trump supporters she was going after in that horrible debacle of a speech where she talked about the basket of deplorables. Half of them are in a basket of deplorables. Biden just goes out there and says all of Trump's supporters are garbage. It's unfathomable, and at the very best, it is a deeply bad political comment, and at worst it reflects something that Joe Biden thinks about half the country.
All right, pause it there. I got to tell people about Relief Factor, and we'll come back. Otto von Bismarck said that there is a providence that protects idiots, drunkards, children, and the United States of America. That providence protected us in this election, both from Joe Biden being president again and from Kamala Harris. Relief Factor is going to protect you from the minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging. I can say that with great authority and certainty because I've been taking it for a decade. It's the only supplement I've taken for more than 20 years. I'm in pretty good shape, and I go up and down the implacable hill, and I run along the beach, and I trundle. I'm not as fast as I once was, but I keep going, and the minor aches and pains don't come because I take Relief Factor every day. Don't use Tylenol. Don't use any of the other ones that mask pain. Don't mask your pain. Reduce the inflammation that creates pain. Help your body help itself. That's what Relief Factor does with Icarian and curcumin or resveratrol omega. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. John and Amy might need this because they're going to have to sprint from some people, and they better keep their head on a swivel. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, or head to their website and find the starter pack. You can't miss it. $19.95 for 3 weeks, less than $1 a day. All you have to do is go to relieffactor.com. That's relieffactor.com. The conclusion of my interview with John Allen and Amy Parnes on their new book, Fight, is next. All right, let's go to the end of my interview with John Allen and Amy Parnes on their brand new book, Fight. Amy Parnes, who set up the shot for the Dana Bash interview with Tim Wilson, the vice president, because the shot was awful. I'm not a set designer, but I've been doing television for 35 years, and the moment I saw it, I said, who in the world thought up this shot? Who did that?
We know what happened after. She had chair requirements, as we report.
Yeah, you report that.
And that was something that was real. We have the exact measurements of what they needed to do to produce other chairs and interviews. They knew, obviously, that didn't look good. And that's something that the president does really well. He's really good at the visual. Everything is about visuals for him. I think the Harris campaign knew that they had kind of messed up that visual.
All right, last question for both of you. I'll start with you, Amy. I am personally aghast at what the book reveals. We were without a president for at least 9 months, most likely 2.5 years, could have been longer. Are you aghast that we didn't know this?
I think, the media comes off as really not great in recent reporting of these books, and people love to blame the media that we didn't report this. I think we all knew. I know I certainly have reported things about Biden, and John has as well. So it's not like no one knew about this. But what we do in this book is we show you just how bad it was.
Now, John, my personal theory, I only know Ron Klain a little bit. I think he quit because he knew how bad it was. I don't think, and I know he went out and did debate prep, and the debate prep didn't happen. It was a nightmare, very well explained. Do you think he was aghast? Are you aghast at the fact the man was not competent to be president?
I'm aghast, and the way that I always look at it is this moment where they decide, where he decides he's going to step aside as the candidate for president, but somehow is still considers himself competent to run the country. I mean, this is just it's such utter hooey. The idea that he's, incompetent to run a campaign, but competent to run the country. I am aghast at some of the things that we found. As Amy said, all of us I shouldn't say all of us reporters. The two of us as reporters, I know for sure, spent a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly was going on at the White House. It was very difficult to do. I know both of us reported things over the course of the last few years that pointed to diminished faculties.
Well, I'm here with a prediction. If either of you end up in the Potomac, I'm looking for Jen O'Malley Dillon. That's who I think is going to have her fingerprints on the knife, because she cannot be happy with either of you. Have you heard from her yet?
Well, we don't talk about our sources.
Yeah.
All right. I just say thank you for a great book. Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House will be #1 on the New York Times list. You got there first. You got it done. You must have worked 24/7, 360, well, not 365. It's 4 months ago. Well done. My hat is off to you, and thank you both for joining me. Have a good book tour.
Thank
you, Hugh.
It is a great book. It is #7 at Amazon as we speak. I'm sure it's going to go to #1 on the New York Times. It is the first. They beat the others. There are lots of these books coming. Each one of them I will read, because each will tell another damning detail in a scandalous story that ought to be on the top of every newspaper in America. Joe Biden was incompetent. It's Election day in Florida and Wisconsin. I think you've got at least 1 hour left in Florida to go vote in the 6th Congressional District for Randy Fine. That runs from Jacksonville down to Daytona Beach. Could be close. Could be closer than we like. Make sure you go and find where to vote. Go check your app. Get out and vote. Feeling pretty good about the 1st Congressional District and Jimmy out there on the Panhandle. But get out and vote anyway. It's your right. It's your great duty as an American. It's also a great honor. It's a special thing to be able to vote. Too many people in the world don't get to vote. So go out and vote, Floridians. Whether you live on the 95 between Jacksonville and Daytona, or you're over in the Panhandle. And if you're up in Wisconsin, go vote for Randy Schumer. He's running for Supreme Court. Very close race. And I believe, Schimmel, and I believe that the left-wing progressive lady who's running is just going to rip up the congressional districts, regardless of law, regardless of rule. They're just going to be the most partisan court in the world if she wins. Don't let her win. Go out and vote for Randy. Get out there and do it today. You have for a while. I want to go back to my interview, which I began the show with, and continued with Haviv Reddy-Gur about the law passed in Israel that changes the makeup of the Israeli Supreme Court, which is 15 people. Right now, there's a judicial committee of 9. It has 3 members of the court on it, and it requires 7 votes to be approved, meaning that the members of the highest court have a veto over someone joining the highest court. That's just wrong. Israel voted to change it. My question to Haviv is, do you have a democracy? Do you have the rule of law if the Israeli Supreme Court strikes down that law? Back to that conversation. I really do recommend everyone ask Haviv anything, especially the episode 6, which is about the judicial reform and about what I did not understand about Israel is the number of tribes, and that is small t tribes, whether it is Tel Aviv, secular Jews, religious Jews in Jerusalem, Haredim of many different varieties, the Bedouin, the Druze. There are tribes all over the place. And in the back of my mind, framed the question, do you have affirmative action there? Is there a DEI in Israel? Because DEI in the United States has divided the United States very badly. In fact, the last election was a DEI election, and affirmative action was ruled unconstitutional 2 terms ago by the Supreme Court. Finally, completely, 100%. There had been a little bit left over for affirmative action in higher education. That's gone now. Does Israel have an affirmative action system at all for all these different tribes?
There's some measure of affirmative action. and it's more government programs that favor certain groups. So it could be women, it can be minorities, it can be, but it's not systemic, and it's not built in to legal requirements of most institutions and things like that. Without any affirmative action whatsoever, women are more than half the judges of Israel. When you see a woman at the top of Israel's judiciary, that is entirely representative of the entirety of the judiciary all the way down the chain. With zero affirmative action, the University of Haifa is, I think, over 40% Arab, and it's a very, very good university. And the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the highest ranked university in Israel, is a quarter Arab. And that's without any of those kinds of affirmative action programs. And so
Interesting.
We have them at the margins, mostly in the public service.
How does admissions work at the universities? Because that was the last bastion of race consciousness and intersectionality consciousness in the United States, and it's gone now. But how does it work? How do you get into the best universities in Israel? Is it just one test?
Well, yeah, mostly grades and tests. There's not so much interviews and appeals and a process of reading your essays. That is, it's students. It's important to remember, because there's national service, because there's military service or a kind of national volunteering program that many religious people take who don't want to serve in the military. People arrive at college a little bit older and a little bit keener, and Israelis generally marry younger than they do generally in the West. And so they're a little bit more trying to get work done, right? They're trying to get their degree to go off to live their lives. And so colleges are much, much more professional. We don't have that whole college campus life that you do. It's not a 4-year sort of post-high school education camp kind of experience. It's much, much more embedded. I, for example, worked a 40-hour work week while I was a student because I had to pay my way through college. So that's the general experience.
Is there a system in Israel where embedded elites help each other? I've just been rereading David Halberstrom's The Best and the Brightest, and it's a real through the looking glass, backwards glance at 1972. And it's not good what you see there. You see elites everywhere running things, running them badly, running us into Vietnam. But it was run by elites for elites, and they made elite mistakes. Do such elites exist in Israel that give each other helping hands, hands up, hands washing hands?
Yes, absolutely. And not only that, but because it's a country with deep ethnic divides and deep religious divides within the ethnic groups. In other words, within the Jews, there are these very different religious groups. And because it's a country of immigration waves, German Jews and Polish Jews today all just look like European Ashkenazi Jews. But in the 1950s, it was very important to German Jews that they were not Polish Jews, and they looked down on Polish Jews. And there was actually some sort of cultural tension between a Supreme Court that had a lot of German Jews in the early years of the state and the fact that David Ben-Gurion was Polish, right? So that was a big difference. But then come Moroccans and Iraqis and all kinds of different Jewish communities from the Arab world and from the Muslim world. And they can't break into these new elites, and decisions are made for them by a mostly Ashkenazi, political elite that makes decisions about where to settle an incoming population. Israel has about 650,000 citizens at its founding. Israel will have double that, 1.3 million, 4 years later, as Iraq, empties out en masse of Jews as they flee. In Iraq that had basically spent the war years being Nazi. And so you had in Israel these mass waves of immigration, a country struggling to deal with these mass waves, and a lot of marginalization by these entrenched elites. Prime Minister Netanyahu campaigns on this every election. And it's the fact that he can campaign and win by telling Arab world Jews, Mizrahi Jews, who are a majority of his core base, that he can tell them that there's still an Ashkenazi elite on the court, that there's still an Ashkenazi elite in the state apparatuses and in the military and all of that, means that people still feel it. In other words, there's enough there to base a campaign on. I'm actually personally very critical of that. We've already had a Persian chief of staff of the IDF. We have Mizrahi Jews on the court, and by the way, Netanyahu hasn't appointed has very rarely actually appointed a Mizrahi Jew to the high court, right? But the campaign has resonance, which means that ordinary people still experience it. And when you take the Arab-Jewish divide, I think that divide is even larger. There's very much a sense that it's a Jewish political space. And Arabs are everywhere, in every high-tech company, in every, and They're entering high-tech industry on merit. They're a huge percentage at the Technion, our finest technical college, our MIT. But it's slow, and there's growth. It's good. It's something that's happening. It's changing. They're more and more in the judiciary, more and more in the police, more and more in these important systems. But there's absolutely a sense that there's an elite, and it's been a problem. The entire campaign.
So, last question, Aviv. Yeah, long term. When you're my age, can a state as small as Israel survive with an elite that is known to prefer its own? In America, where frontier farms and factories basically leveled the whole place out, there is no tribe. There was an elite on the East Coast. It's been destroyed. Legacy admissions are over. It's basically a flat plain with some interruptions for merit, but it's basically a flat plain. Can Israel exist long term with this many tribes, with that distinct set of identities? And I go from Bedouin to Druze to Jerusalem Jews to Tel Aviv secularists. It just doesn't seem to me like it'll always come together when it needs to come together.
That's a very good question. It's who we are. It's like asking the Lebanese if Lebanon can survive when it has so many different tribes. Ironically, in Lebanon, it's an even better question because it's not clear that it can. The answer is yes. The answer is it's such an important thing to explain because the terms mean different things here than they do.
And I'm going to pause it there. It's a long answer. I don't have enough time for it. I would send you to my YouTube channel, Hugh Hewitt YouTube, and catch the end of Haviv Reddy Gur today. And do listen to his new podcast, Ask Haviv Anything, because it's absolutely a fabulous podcast. It's now on my must-listen to, along with Getting Hammered, along with the Commentary podcast, the Ruthless podcast, Dwayne's World. I have regular pods, and they make up a lot of time. And I'm asking you to add another one, but I think Israel's fascinating. They are the equal of any of our allies. We might be fighting a war with Iran with them by the end of the week. Sure does look like it's getting ready for that. And by war, I mean just an aerial war. But I'll come back and talk with Byron York about that. Brad Schimmel is running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Randy Fine is running in the 6th District of Florida. Jimmy is running in the first. He won't just say Jimmy in the 1st District. Byron York, though, is running to tell us what he knows about those three races. Byron York, of course, with the Washington Examiner as their senior political correspondent, Fox News contributor extraordinaire. Hi, Byron. What do you know about these three races, if anything?
Well, definitively nothing. I do have thoughts.
Tell me your thoughts.
Okay. First of all, on the Florida 1st District, the Jimmy District, that was something Matt Gaetz was the congressman there. Trump won by 34, 35 points in that district, and Democrats have poured a lot of money in it, but they're not going to win. They're going to lose.
Have you talked to Jimmy, by the way?
I've not.
Oh, he's a fabulous candidate. He's just absolutely one of those people that come through the radio or the television and you say, I like this guy. And he's going to be there forever.
A lot of people have been saying that, and they really expect him to be in Congress very soon. On the other side of the state, Florida 6, the Mike Waltz seat situation is much different. First of all, Trump won that one, too, by 30 points. But the Republican candidate there, Randy Fine, Republicans don't seem to be nearly as happy with. Didn't raise a lot of money. The National Party had come in and rescue him. Doesn't appear to have held a whole lot of events. My sense is he's going to win, but he's going to win by a lot less than 30 points, which brings me to the Democratic victory claim. You'll see two Republican wins in the House tonight and at least one Democratic claim of victory. Because, Fine wins by less than 30 points. So therefore, the public is registering its disapproval of everything that Donald Trump has done since Inauguration Day.
That's nonsense, of course, but they'll say it.
It is.
Yeah, but they'll say
exactly what they're going to say, though, yes.
What about Wisconsin? I didn't think Schimmel had a chance, but then I saw some numbers yesterday that suggested maybe people don't want to gerrymander the state. What do you hear?
Yeah, that has been the case. We have seen polling all over the place. I will say that some of the polling that shows Schemmel in better shape has come from conservative groups, and some of the polling that shows Crawford in better shape has come from liberal groups, because as we know, this is nonpartisan. It's just a conservative versus a liberal. But here, I think, in the spin race, you've also got the presence of Elon Musk, who's gone up to Wisconsin, put a cheese head on, campaign for Schemmel. This is extremely close. Trump won Wisconsin by less than 1 point. And I was listening to Kevin McCarthy on Fox this morning, who was saying, look, this is just all about Congress. This is about redistricting. And I believe the Wisconsin congressional delegation is 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
Right.
So clearly Democrats want to get more seats. And given the incredibly narrow margin in the House right now, that would not be good for Republicans. So, when something is this close and there are polls on either side, I just wouldn't make a prediction. But both sides have poured a ton of money into this.
You know what's interesting about Wisconsin, Byron, is that in the 1800s, upstate New York was called the burned over district because they had so many religious revivals. Yeah. Wisconsin is the burned over district of politics. From the beginning of Scott Walker's run through the present, I would bet more money has been spent per vote in Wisconsin than anywhere. You think that's a pretty good guess? Maybe Pennsylvania.
I think that's probably a pretty good guess. I mean, it's at least $90 million on this race, roughly equal, although a little more for Republicans. Maybe $100 million by the time it's counted, and I think that's a very good. Rich Lowry yesterday said, Wisconsin is the new Florida. Florida used to be incredibly close. It's obviously a big, significant state, and it was a major, major swing state. Now it's not, but nor is Ohio. Used to be a major presidential state.
And Missouri.
But Wisconsin seems to have taken that role.
Yeah. Now let me ask you about Elon. He went up there, and one of his rallies was with a DOGE guy who brought out the Social Security numbers that had been drawn down from 2020 to the present. It's 5 million numbers. So that's not the number of people who crossed into the country illegally. It's the number of illegal entries who claim Social Security cards. Did that shock you?
Yeah, I think one of the things about the DOGE communication effort, which I've been pretty critical of, is that they haven't made a good case for a lot of the things that they've been finding. And a lot of the things they originally said about Social Security, they were saying that they were like, or people would get the impression that there were millions of people who were over the age of 150 who were getting checks. And so obviously there's fraud going on there. What's going on with that? This is something, the abuse of Social Security numbers by illegal immigrants or for other reasons is something that's actually serious. We began to see that with that great interview that Bret Baier did with Musk and 7 of his DOGE lieutenants, and we're hearing a little bit more about it now.
I'm calling them the Men in Black, and I want to talk with you about this through the break and into the next segment. I think that may be one of the more significant television moments in the last few years. And I have my theories why, but why do you think it was a good interview?
Well, because up until that point, the media image, not the Fox News image, but the media image, the legacy media image of Musk and the team that he had assembled was you've got this out-of-control billionaire and a bunch of teenagers who are tech whizzes and gamers who are just running rampant through the nation's most sensitive information or from people's Social Security accounts or anything like that. And they were just running through, bulls in a china shop, tearing up things, breaking things. And that was the image. And so you get Musk and 7 of his top subject matter guys sitting down with Bret Baier, and these are very serious. They're adults. Many of them have been very big successes in business. They're volunteering their time and their talents on this. And they're serious people doing serious things. You could not have had a greater contrast between the dominant media image and the reality.
Yeah, and to me, what came through is competence. I thought every single one of those 7, and I don't know their names. I have their names in front of me on cut sheets, but they're not well-known names. But they exuded, I mean, agree with me or disagree, I thought they exuded competence, Byron.
I thought so too, and then they were all professional successes too. I mean, it doesn't mean, just because you succeeded in one business doesn't mean you'll absolutely succeed in another line of work. But it's a good indicator. And these were all men who had made significant success in the business world.
Don't go anywhere. I'm going to talk with Byron York about DOGE and other things during the break. Did you see Lieutenant General Kane's testimony before the Armed Services Committee in the Senate today?
Just a little bit of it, yes.
Very impressive man. And do you think he'll be confirmed? Question number 1.
Yeah, I think he will. It was interesting. Some of the parts that I saw were questioning from Democrats about what Trump had said to him and whether General Kane had put on a MAGA hat and all of this stuff. And it was really kind of stupid. And by the way, General Kane said he had not. He said he'd never worn political merch, I believe.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty good answer to that. But I have been hearing about General Kane for a long time, just listening to Trump's speeches. Because Trump always tells this story of ISIS was, when Trump took office in 2017, was still a very deadly force. And Obama had been doing all these kind of pinprick attacks on ISIS, in which U.S. fighters would, take off, fly around for a few hours, come back, and never have dropped any ordnance, any bombs, nothing on ISIS. And John McCain and others were very upset about what was going on in the Obama years on this. And then Trump just comes and just destroys ISIS. And he tells the story of going over to, going to Iraq and meeting General Raising Kane there and saying, why is ISIS so tough? It's taken us forever to try to, and he says they're not. We're just got our hands tied behind our backs. And if we were free to really attack ISIS, we could take care of it pretty quickly. And Trump gave him his chance, and it worked.
And he did. Do you think we're doing that again with the Houthis right now?
We'll see. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, the Houthis have been bombed by Europeans, by us, by a lot of people for a long time. And I've always wondered, how it is they seem so resistant to some of these bombing campaigns. But we'll see. I do not know if Trump is using the ISIS game plan against them or not.
All right. I'm going to come right back with Byron York and talk about what I learned in the book Fight, the brand new book by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. I have posted that over at the YouTube channel if you missed it. Byron, I had on Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes today, the first day that their book Fight was not embargoed. I read it over the weekend. There are a lot of stories. Story number 1 is that Joe Biden was incompetent for long stretches, if not for years, while as president, and it's a scandal. People can make of what they will, but the evidence is there. Number 2, though, in the middle of the debate with Kamala Harris, Chris LaCivita chases down a fellow named John Santucci, who is probably the executive producer or senior producer, screaming at him that Muir and Lindsey Davis are effing Trump. And Santucci agrees. That's what's in the book. I'm amazed that that's in the book. I would never, ever go back to ABC. Either Muir and Lindsey Davis went rogue or they planned to screw them all along. What do you think?
Well, this is the first I've heard of this story. I've been looking forward to this book, and I think I saw an excerpt from it a week ago, but I've not read that part that you're talking about. So it's news to me. It's news to me, but not news to me. It's obviously true. Anybody who watched it could tell it was true. But the ABC, producer executive would say that. It was really pretty incredible.
Well, the other thing that's in here, September of 2022, Kevin McCarthy is walking around with President Biden as he just loses it in the course of a tour and just sort of wanders around with people. And McCarthy thinks to himself, my God, the president has lost it. Flash forward 5 months, Eric Swalwell, completely different side of the Congress, different party, different ideology. Same reaction to a visit at the congressional picnic. My God, the president has lost it. I think, and we're going to get 3 or 4 of these books in a row, Byron, the evidence is piling up pretty fast that Joe Biden was not competent to be president. Do you think that that's going to have any repercussions at all if indeed my reaction is widely shared?
You know, I'm going to have to wait and see what the public's reaction is on this, because I'm of two minds about this. Is that one, this was pretty obvious. I mean, the White House was still, for all the covering up they were trying to do, they were still putting Joe Biden out for public events where he would have really weird moments. And you know, in the month before the debate with Trump, there was that moment for the D-Day anniversary. There was that moment with the Hollywood fundraiser, and then there was the moment with the Juneteenth
freeze
event.
Yeah,
the freeze in the White House, and that's the one I made a big deal of, because it was just absolutely extraordinary, and something was clearly wrong with the president. For people who didn't see it, the president actually stood frozen, his eyes staring straight ahead, his body motionless for nearly 2 minutes. You try that; it's a long time.
Have we seen him in public since the election?
I don't think so. You know, there have been a couple of little stories about him. I think he went to dinner. I think, and this is not like a camera crew covering it, I believe he went to dinner someplace in Washington. And there was a report about that. But I don't
think we have either. And I'll tell you, I said this jokingly to John and Amy, they better wear body armor when they go out, because nobody's left. Nancy Pelosi's new name is Nancy the Knife. She cut him out. She killed him. She disemboweled Biden. Everyone else is afraid, and everyone else is in on the deal. And what really comes through, and this is really hard to believe, Hunter Biden is his principal advisor in this book.
Yeah.
I can't even put I'm glad he's in recovery, but he's still an addict, and he still has all that problem. Can you believe Hunter Biden is his principal advisor? That itself is evidence that the president isn't thinking straight.
And Hunter Biden had shown a lot of sleazy evidence of sleazy activities long before he, got his official crack addict card. I mean, he was really doing exercising bad judgment in the way he was making a living for years and years before he became addicted to drugs. And so it was. Obviously, Joe Biden always said that Hunter Biden was the smartest man he'd ever known and that sort of stuff. You would think maybe a father would say some of that, but the fact that he was actually literally such a close person in the White House and had such an important role is pretty stunning, given the picture that everybody's seen of Hunter Biden from the laptop.
I have a column coming out in the Washington Examiner tomorrow about this book. And the big two reveals are the ABC. That's a little reveal. Just ABC was in the tank. The big reveal is, man, we dodged a bullet. We didn't have a president for at least 2.5 years, or at least we had an intermittent president. And it's not a job where you can have long episodes of incoherence, Byron. I really do think someone's got to have hearings into that. We might need an amendment because the 25th Amendment didn't work.
It did not work. And I mean, this is so interesting, because if you remember, when some of the videos, the Hollywood video and the D-Day video came up, Democrats would accuse Republicans of faking it. The videos were all fake.
Deep fakes.
Of course, they knew this was the cheap fakes. They knew this was all true.
They knew it, and they lied. Byron York did not lie. You can read him every day in the Washington Examiner. You can see him on Fox News and hear him every week. Thank you, Byron. That music means Lilacs is in the house. I encourage you to go to lilacs.com. You can read his Substack, jameslilacs.substack.com. But if you go to lilacs.com, you can get his podcast, Dining with Jim. You can get all sorts of different things over at lilacs.com. James, how are you?
It's Dining with Jimmy now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. Happy April to you, too.
That's my April Fool's joke for you. I want to begin by confirming for the audience that Tim Walz is your governor, correct?
He is at present still that, yes.
And your congresswoman is Ilhan Omar.
That she is as well. And these are facts known to all. Do you have some surprise you're about to give me?
Well, I do, because I was reading this book called Fight, Inside the Wildest Bite. It's by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnson. It's the first of the Inside Scoop books on the campaign. And it turns out, you may find it hard to believe, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris were both shocked when they lost. They thought they were going to win.
I've heard things to the contrary. I've actually heard that they were showing her some polls and said, wait a minute, no, forget Iowa, forget about it. No, it's not going to happen. But there's too much vibe. There were too many good spirits. There's too much of a brat summer going on that she was informed of this. So it shouldn't have come as that much of a surprise. But are these the same people telling us about the inside of the campaign who were not telling us about Joe Biden's condition before the election?
That's the very true. I did raise that with them. And in fact, when you walk away from FIGHT, the biggest story of all is that Joe Biden was cognitively impaired for at least extended periods of time, going back at least to 2022. That's the big takeaway. Do you think anyone will notice or care, or is that too much of a scandal for the media to cover?
Well, they don't want to cover it because they covered it up before. They covered it up in the Iowa Hawk way, which is to put a pillow over its face until it stopped moving. So no, I don't think there's enough. I mean, some people who want to make their bones will trade on the fact that there seems to be an attention span and a memory span of about 45 seconds and say, hey, I'm here to be the brave truth teller and tell you what went on behind the scenes. But most of them, I think, would like to paper it over and forget about it. But the auto pen thing comes. I mean, did we not have an executive order saying, oh, those pardons, the auto pen pardons, forget about that? That's going to have to work its way through whatever mechanism.
Oh, that's actually been decided. Supreme Court's already decided the auto pen is good. You don't have to worry about that. All those pardons are pardoned. Did you get one? Did I miss that? Did you get pardoned?
Well, I did, but it was to Jimmy Lilac, so it didn't count.
Oh, it didn't count. Okay.
Is that, I mean, I follow these things, and I did not hear about that, which leads me to believe they just don't want to talk about the auto pen thing at all because of the implications of it.
It is the implication of this entire book is that it was the Biden Regency. We shouldn't call it the Biden presidency. We should call it the Biden Regency. Remember when King George, the last king of America, kind of lost his marbles for 20 years and they had the Regency? Well, that's what we had. We had the Regency, but we didn't know to call it that. Now I want to move on to DOGE. I want to talk to you about DOGE pre-Bret Baier and DOGE post-Bret Baier. Before the interview, what did you think of DOGE?
I thought it was an absolutely essential, wonderful, violent berserker act that was going to go through all of these things that we're always being told we're going to go line by line. But no, it turns out you got to zero them out and make people justify building them back up. I liked it. And were mistakes made? I'm sure some mistakes were made, but you have a bunch of really smart guys looking at spreadsheets and putting stuff together. I learned how the money goes from USAID to NGOs, which really aren't the end part if they're getting money from government, to flows to here, to there, to here, to there. It was fascinating to see it broken down, and nobody in journalism had, intended on looking where the money goes and how. So I liked it. Should I not like it now?
No. What I thought beforehand was it was a bunch of people with Cheeto-stained fingers drinking Red Bulls who look like they could be an extra in the Almost Famous movie from 30 years ago. Turns out that the fellows who are running DOGE with Elon are all pretty sharp, middle-aged execs on their A game. I mean, I was blown away by those. Did you see the interview?
No, I've only seen parts of it, but those two are not mutually inconsistent. You can have both, and as a matter of fact, I'd like to think that there is that the amount of Cheeto residue on the keyboards at the White House is still markedly greater than what it was during the Biden regency.
I agree with you on that, but I do like the idea of adult supervision in the room because sometimes enthusiasm can carry you past boundaries that you are. I'll just click and find out what's in this box. That might take you a little bit far if you're 22. When you've got a 40-year-old oil and gas executive who's running 5 companies in Houston and lays it down to go to Washington, D.C., I think $1 a year man in World War II. I think actually patriot.
That's right. The $1 a year man reference is a good one and lost on most people, but I'm glad you made it. And what you've just done here, Hugh, however, is just confirm most people's fears that it is the fossil fuel industry that is behind this. And that all they want to do is to continue what they do so they can kill the planet so we can all hop a ride with Elon to the new planet that's being built up for the MAGA types. That's probably what they're going to say.
Now, James, when we first started talking in the Mesolithic age or something like that, you were warming up to streaming. You never thought you were going to like streaming, but then you like streaming. So that brings me to the current streaming. Did you watch Landman?
Landman is a politically correct show. It is vulgar. It promotes the worst sort of behavior. I could not love it any more than I do. Billy Bob Thornton delivering Tyler Sheridan dialogue is. I save that for the weekend like I save a fine cigar and a good glass of whiskey. I really, it's a good guilty pleasure. And it's not a guilty pleasure.
Where has Taylor Sheridan been all of our lives? Did he just come out of nowhere and make 25 series?
Yeah. Yes, he did. He did. As a matter of fact, he was. He apparently was. I don't know, and I haven't watched Yellowstone to tell you the truth because it seems like such a colossal investment to get into it. But I love Billy Bob Thornton, so when I started watching this, I just thought this is up my alley because my family was in oil, on the retail end of it. But the way he delivers these full-throated, sarcastic, cynical, but utterly reasonable and correct assessments of exactly what this country needs to run is just great. Now, is he preaching to the choir? Probably so. I don't think there's a lot of people in the Green New Deal era who are out there keen to see episode 5 of Landman, but they ought to.
But you know what the best line in the whole show is? We got a special on Bud Light. I'll bet you do. James Lilacs. Follow him at lilacs.com. Go to jameslilacs.substack.com to get a dose of good humor. Whenever he sits down at the keyboard, come right back, America, and I'll say goodbye for the day. May 1st and 2nd, the Job Creators Annual Freedom Fighters Summit is going to be held in Savannah, Georgia. May 1st and 2nd, you can go if you register and get the tickets. You head over to JCN, as in Job Creators Network, JCN2025summit.com. That's JCN2025summit.com. And if you use the promo code Salem, the second ticket you buy is half off. Now, some of you will, I know what you'll do. You'll buy 2 tickets and you'll have your friend pay full price. Some of you will just give the second ticket to your friend and tell them that you paid full price. And some of you will be like Dwayne and charge them double for the second ticket for which you paid half price. But whatever it is you do, head to jcn2025summit.com and use the promo code Salem. I'm going to be there with Bennett, Mike Gallagher, Bill Bennett, and I are together again. Kellyanne Conway, Grover Norquist, Governors Youngkin and Kemp. It's going to be a lot of great fun. Savannah is a wonderful city. I haven't been in a long time. Fetching Miss Hewitt's never been. She's looking forward to that. May 1st and 2nd. Don't forget the promo code Salem. A portion of your ticket is tax deductible. And supports the Job Creators Network. You'll have to figure out what that is by talking to them. JCN2025summit.com. Use the promo code Salem. I want you to hear Pam Bondi today at the Department of Justice, cut number 8.
I've made it clear if you take part in the wave of domestic terrorism against Tesla properties, we will find you, arrest you, and put you behind bars. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Department of Justice has unsealed federal charges against another Tesla attacker. We've charged Cooper Frederick in the firebombing of a Tesla dealership that occurred on March 7th in Loveland, Colorado. All of these cases are a serious threat to public safety. Therefore, there will be no negotiating. We are seeking 20 years in prison. The crime was committed in Colorado, and thanks to the great investigative work by the FBI, the defendant was arrested in Plano, Texas. Let this be a warning. You can run, but you cannot hide.
I love this Attorney General. Way to go, Pam Bondi.